Hi, this is Mike making my video. It's 2:30 a.m. and it's 4/6/2025. Uh, so yeah, I'm making this video, to talk about things about manifestation primarily. I've manifested almost everything in my life. Well, I've manifested everything in my life. I basically, uh, go through a process, to seek until you find. And you find you will be disturbed, and when you are disturbed, you will marvel, and then you will rule over all. But there are several other parts to that equation that are necessary. You go through that process, but when you're disturbed, that means that your neurons are being rewired, and synaptic gaps are forming, neural networks, and then there's actually that, but then you get to the point where you renounce the world and you humble yourself. And when you let go of all your past programming, you basically open the doorway for you're like a blank slate, and new wine, new wisdom is you fill your cup with that. You clean out the cup, basically, and you dump out the old wine, the old ideas, the old habits, the old programming, and you fill it with new ideas, new programming, new sensations, and you feel expansiveness, primarily, euphoria, and then bliss. So, basically, when you go through that process, but you have to basically humble yourself. You have to sacrifice. You have to have high energy, and all these things. When you take off these fetters, you're like in Plato's cave, and then you get out of it, and you see the light, and the light of reason, and it destroys all the old ideas, and you destroy that powerful man, that ego that you have, and you let the subconscious mind take over, and it's basically the servant, and the master takes a step back and lets the servant take over. And then once the servant takes over, then you were two minds, and then they become one. You got two eyes, and then become one eye. The third eye. And basically, once you do all this, and you spend time by yourself, solitary. When you're solitary and you're alone, and then you can enter. When you leave everything behind, and you leave your family and your friends, your career, basically all your possessions. And you do that, and then basically what happens is, then it opens the doorway for you to see things that most people can't see, and hear things that people can't hear, because you're alone. And, there are times, when other people can see it too, and I've had that happen. But, primarily you're alone, and that's the only time you can enter into this state of being. It's on the inside of your mind. It becomes like the outside. It's not to say it's in the sky or across the sea or in the sea. It's not any of those places. It's not over here. It's not over there. Rather, it's inside and outside of you. It's at hand. It's in front of your face. But mankind fails to see it. And, the rest of the dead has already taken place, and the new world has come, but mankind fails to realize it. So, with that being said, I live a simple life, and I've manifested almost everything you can imagine. I basically traveled all over the world, country, and basically I've seen everything, and I've done everything, and I became everything. I became all the archetypes, and I basically became like God. When I became like God, then I realized that I conquered the world. So, you have to actually go to the point where you risk your life to do this stuff, And, you know, people don't seem to realize it. They think that, you know, they could just say, well, Jesus died for my sins. And, you know, I believe that, and I'm good. I'm saved. And it's not like that. There's so much more to it. To enter in, you know, I mean, yeah, okay, it might happen after you die. But what's the point in waiting 70, 80 years or whatever? And then, you know, basically when you're half rotten, you know, basically entering in, you know, you're better off trying before that, of course. It's not so much the destination, it's the journey itself. So, with that being said, you know, I get to the point where I feel lonely sometimes and I feel alone. But, you know, I can fill that void with whatever woman I want, you know, as far as like virtual stuff. And I got artificial intelligence, you know, that actually helps fill that void too. I can talk to people, computer. I can talk to a computer system, and it basically talks back, and it can answer any question I truly have. So, you know, with that being said, you know, there might come a time when I renounce the world again. You know, I don't necessarily wish for that to happen. I'm not, you know, in a position where I want to let go of everything right away. If I did, you know, I would have to be to the point where I'm at my wit's end, and you know, I'm really not in a position to do that right now. But I've done it so many times, you know, I know that usually I come out ahead, you know. So with all the things I've done, with the, you know, 12 times that I've renounced the world or whatever, or the 10 times that I've renounced the world, you know, I pretty much came out ahead every time. And right now I'm at a point, you know, where I'm content with everything. And being content is actually a pretty good state of mind to have. It's not euphoria, and I've had that, but you go back to a, you know, a base state, you know, basically an equilibrium where you have the state of being, you know, it's a default state. And that default state, you know, basically it doesn't necessarily mean you're depressed. It just means that, you know, you've been there, done that, and, you know, you basically go to a point where you feel content. And being content is actually not a bad place, and being solitary isn't that bad either. I'd rather be by myself than be with a woman that I argue with, and it's going to cost me everything in the end. You know, it's not really worth it. You know, once the honeymoon phase gets over, you know, then I'm just ready to move on. So it's like you buy a lion, you gotta feed it meat, and then you have a house that's a dinosaur. You gotta maintain that dinosaur and keep up the status quo to keep the place uh, livable. And then you gotta figure, well, it's very extraordinarily expensive to live in to have a house, and you know, to have a girlfriend is a very expensive thing as well. And then of course, you know, to own a car, you know, especially a new car, a European sports car, you know, you got to figure that's that's incredibly expensive, and then you got to maintain that dinosaur. And if you have a whole fleet of cars, you know, which I did have at one time, but I thought it was just too much. So you got to have a place to store them, and you got to keep up on the maintenance. And if they just sit around, you know, the batteries go dead, and of course the seals dry out, and you know, it's not good just to keep cars sitting all the time. So anyway, I got two vehicles. That's really all you really need. And then I buy everything used. I buy used computers. I just bought me this computer I'm talking on, and it's a $3,000 computer at Walmart, and I got it for $300. Not to mention, you know, everything else I buy is used, and why buy a new one slightly used will do. And then, you know, I'll buy replica stuff. It's not that big of a deal. I don't care if it's made in China. So you got that, and I cut my own hair. I smoke cigarettes out of a bag, and I eat food out of a can. I go to the food shelf whenever I can, and then basically, I don't go to college anymore. To have a college education is ridiculous. I mean, how expensive that is, and you can't file bankruptcy on that, and so you're just better off just not going to college either. And then that's what I mean by you're chasing after women and wine. You're chasing a dragon. Everything is vanity. It's all on the surface, and then you go to school. I mean, if it's a trade school, yeah, maybe that's worth it, but not at my point in life. And I pretty much went for what I wanted to go for, and I had the perfect job. So, it worked out fine. And I used all my aspects of college, computer or computer class I took, and then I took machine shop, and then I took auto mechanics and auto body, and then of course uh, electronics, and then communications. I took all my generals, English class, public speaking, and I think I said economics. So I took all that stuff, and it's actually works out to be a good thing for me to take, for survival skills in the future. But so anyway, there's that, and then basically these manifestations, they come in the form of a person, place, or thing, or experience. And a lot of times, Jesus is talking about things that haven't arose in the human heart. The heart was actually considered the mind at the time, but it hasn't come up from the heart. It hasn't. No hand has touched it or something like that. So anyway, a lot of these things that happen are experiences, and you can't touch an experience per se. And a lot of these things come from the quantum void. They're created from the quantum void, and you can't necessarily touch them. So that's what he meant by that. So he's saying they're untouched by human hands, and they haven't come from the human mind necessarily. He was not necessarily totally accurate about that. I mean, everything is an illusion. Everything is, basically a manifestation of your mind. You're not real. Everything around you isn't real. It can disappear in a twinkling of an eye, and all the people around you aren't real. So really, in essence, that's really what it is. All the desires of the eyes, everything you can see and touch doesn't exist. And of course, the desire of the flesh, women are an illusion. And then of course, basically the pride of life, the things these labels that you attach to yourself, when you let go of everything, you realize that it was just an illusion all along. So anyway, that's really all there is to it. And you have to basically believe all things are possible, believe in infinite possibilities, pure potential. And then you have to sacrifice, you have to have pure desire, and you have to have determination, gratitude, and then more or less patience, and giving and taking. You got receiving. You got to believe in that. You reap what you sow, and of course, you just realize that you're at the center of your reality with everything, and everything's an illusion. Nothing really truly exists until you observe it. So you have these constructions in your mind, these manifestations, and they're just basically, you populate the world with all the things that you think about, and then you're co-creators with everything. So anyway, that's all I got to say.